In the heart of Manchester's bustling courthouse, an extraordinary moment was about to unfold. The room buzzed with the quiet energy of legal proceedings, sunlight streaming through tall windows and casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Margaret Williams stood near the center of the courtroom, her dark skin gleaming with a quiet dignity that seemed to fill the entire space. She was dressed in a navy blue suit that spoke of professionalism and careful preparation, her posture straight and confident despite the intimidating surroundings. Seated high above on the raised judicial bench was Judge Edward Hartley, a man in his late 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp, penetrating eyes. His reputation in the Manchester legal system was well known, fair but traditionally minded, someone who rarely allowed emotion to interfere with his interpretation of the law. As Margaret waited to be called, she remembered her grandmother's words from years ago. "Remember," she had said, "your work is about more than just rules, it's about people." Those words had guided Margaret through years of challenging community work, protecting children who had no one else to speak for them. The court clerk called her name, and Margaret stepped forward. Her footsteps were measured and calm, each step deliberate and confident. Judge Hartley looked down, his initial glance carrying the weight of years of unconscious bias and institutional thinking. "Ms. Williams," he began, his voice crisp and official, "the documentation before me suggests multiple violations of Community Ordinance 247B. These infractions cannot be taken lightly." Margaret listened carefully, her hands clasped in front of her. She knew the documents looked complicated. What appeared to be violations were actually creative solutions she had developed to help vulnerable children in her community. The judge continued reviewing the papers, his fingers tracing lines of text, occasionally raising an eyebrow or shuffling documents. Margaret remained calm, knowing that her truth was more powerful than any bureaucratic paperwork. In that moment, the courtroom felt like more than just a legal space. It was a battlefield of perceptions, of hidden stories waiting to be understood. Margaret represented something more than just a person facing potential legal consequences. She was a symbol of resilience, of community dedication that often went unrecognized by traditional systems. Judge Hartley's hands moved swiftly, preparing what seemed to be a significant fine. The amount would be enough to potentially cripple the community work Margaret had dedicated her life to pursuing. Each rustle of paper felt like a potential blow to the hope she represented. But Margaret was not afraid. Her years of working with children who had faced unimaginable challenges had taught her that true courage was about standing firm. Even when the world seemed arranged against you, she had seen children transform their lives through support and understanding. And she knew that this moment was just another challenge to overcome. The courtroom walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting. The other legal representatives and waiting individuals sat quietly, sensing something significant was about to happen. Margaret's calm presence created a stillness that contrasted with the usual bustling energy of legal proceedings. Judge Hartley looked up, preparing to deliver what seemed like a potentially devastating judgment. His eyes met Margaret's, and for a brief moment something unexpected happened. It was just a fraction of a second, but in that instant something shifted. A hint of curiosity flickered in the judge's eyes. Something about Margaret's unwavering demeanor made him pause. She wasn't just another case file. She was a human being with a story, with purpose, with a mission that extended far beyond these courtroom walls. Little did Judge Hartley know that this moment would become a turning point, not just for Margaret, but for an entire community waiting to be understood and supported. The fine he was about to impose represented more than just a financial penalty. It was a potential blow to years of dedicated community work. Margaret stood silently, her quiet strength filling the courtroom. She was ready to face whatever judgment would come, knowing that her commitment to helping children was more powerful than any legal document. The stage was set for a remarkable encounter that would challenge assumptions, break down barriers, and reveal the profound human capacity for understanding and transformation. The memories of Margaret's childhood in Liverpool flooded her mind as she stood in the courtroom. Her story began in a small, tight-knit working-class neighborhood, where survival meant more than just paying bills. It meant supporting one another through life's toughest challenges. Margaret's grandmother, Elizabeth, had been her first and most important teacher. A woman of remarkable strength, Elizabeth had worked as a school cleaner while raising 3 children and supporting multiple families in their community. From the tiny kitchen of their modest council house, she had taught Margaret the most important lessons of her life. "Children are the most precious thing," Elizabeth would say, stirring a pot of thick vegetable soup. "When no one else stands up for them, we must." These words had been more than just advice. They were a life philosophy that had shaped Margaret's entire future. Growing up, Margaret had seen firsthand how poverty and lack of support could destroy young lives. She watched neighbors struggle, children falling through educational and social cracks, families fighting impossible battles against systemic challenges. Her grandmother showed her that compassion was not just a feeling, it was an action. In their neighborhood, people didn't just talk about helping, they did something. When a family needed food, neighbors shared. When a child needed extra tutoring, someone would step up. Margaret learned early that community was not just a word, but a living, breathing support system. Her path to becoming a child advocate wasn't a smooth journey. She had worked multiple jobs, studied late into the night, and fought against a system that often seemed designed to keep people like her on the margins. But Elizabeth's lessons burned bright in her heart. Giving up was never an option. University had been challenging. As a young black woman from a working-class background, Margaret faced countless obstacles: professors who underestimated her, classmates who questioned her belonging, institutional barriers that seemed designed to push her away. But she persisted, driven by a vision larger than herself. Her first job working with vulnerable children confirmed everything her grandmother had taught her. She saw children who needed more than just legal protection. They needed genuine human connection, understanding, and hope. Margaret became more than just a social worker. She became a lifeline for countless young souls. The community center she founded was her greatest achievement. Located in the same neighborhood where she grew up, it became a beacon of hope. Children who had no one else found support, education, and most importantly, someone who believed in them. Judge Hartley, sitting high on his bench, could never understand the depth of Margaret's journey. His world of legal documents and courtroom procedures was far removed from the lived experiences of the community she served. Each violation he saw on paper represented a creative solution Margaret had developed to help children who had fallen through society's cracks. Her work wasn't about breaking rules, it was about rewriting them. When traditional systems failed children, Margaret found alternative paths. She negotiated with schools, worked with local authorities, and created support networks that went beyond bureaucratic limitations. The memories of her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of vegetable soup, the warmth of community support, all of these had shaped Margaret into the woman she was today. She wasn't just fighting a legal battle in this courtroom. She was continuing a legacy of compassion and resilience that had been passed down through generations. Margaret understood something profound that many legal professionals missed. Rules were important, but human stories were more crucial. Each child she helped was not just a case file, but a life with potential, with dreams, with the right to a better future. As she stood in the courtroom, Margaret felt her grandmother's spirit surrounding her. The lessons of compassion, resilience, and unwavering support that Elizabeth had taught her years ago in that small Liverpool kitchen were now her most powerful defense. The judge might see violations on paper, but Margaret saw opportunities for transformation. Her entire life had been a testament to the power of understanding, of looking beyond surface-level judgments, and believing in the potential of every single child. In this moment, surrounded by the formal atmosphere of the courtroom, Margaret was more than just a defendant. She was a continuation of a powerful legacy of community support, of standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Her roots were her strength, her grandmother's wisdom, her guiding light, and her commitment to children her most powerful weapon. The courtroom fell silent as Margaret began to speak, her voice steady and clear. She wasn't just defending herself. She was revealing a story of hope, resilience, and extraordinary community work that had transformed countless young lives. Thomas, she began, her voice catching slightly, represents why I do what I do. The name hung in the air, drawing everyone's attention. Judge Hartley leaned forward, his stern expression softening almost imperceptibly. Thomas was a 12-year-old boy from a troubled background. His father had disappeared years ago, and his mother struggled with addiction. The traditional systems had failed him repeatedly. Social services, schools, and local authorities had all missed the signs of his increasing isolation and vulnerability. Margaret explained how she had first encountered Thomas. He was a quiet boy, often invisible in crowded classrooms, his potential hidden behind layers of trauma and missed opportunities. Where others saw a problem, Margaret saw a child waiting to be understood. The community center became Thomas's lifeline. Margaret and her team created a safe space where he could learn, grow, and rediscover his own worth. They provided tutoring, counseling, and most importantly, consistent support. They didn't just address Thomas's immediate challenges, they helped him build a future. Her voice trembled with emotion as she described the transformation. Thomas, once a withdrawn and struggling student, began to excel. He discovered a passion for mathematics, started participating in school activities, and slowly rebuilt his confidence. The violations on the legal documents were actually creative, solutions that had made this transformation possible. Judge Hartley's fingers stopped shuffling papers. His eyes, previously cold and distant, now showed a glimmer of understanding. The legal documents before him were no longer just black and white text. They were a narrative of human resilience. Margaret shared more stories. There was Emily, a young girl who had been on the verge of entering the foster care system. Through Margaret's intervention, she was able to stay with her grandmother, receiving the support and love she desperately needed. Another child, Michael, had avoided falling into juvenile detention through targeted mentorship programs. Each story was a testament to the power of compassionate intervention. Margaret wasn't just breaking rules, she was breaking cycles of poverty, neglect, and lost potential. Her work went far beyond what traditional legal and social systems could achieve. The courtroom atmosphere had changed completely. What had begun as a potential prosecution was transforming into a moment of profound human connection. Judge Hartley's rigid posture began to soften, his decades of judicial experience challenged by the raw humanity of Margaret's work. These documents, Margaret explained, pointing to the legal papers, might look like violations, but each one represents a life saved, a child given a second chance, a family kept together. Her words were simple but powerful, cutting through legal jargon to reveal a deeper truth. She spoke about the community center's holistic approach. It wasn't just about immediate intervention, but about creating sustainable support systems. They worked with schools, local businesses, and families to create a network of care that could prevent children from falling through the cracks. The other legal representatives in the courtroom listened in stunned silence. Margaret's presentation was more than a defense. It was an indictment of a system that often prioritized rules over human potential. Judge Hartley's internal struggle was visible. Years of legal training and institutional thinking were being challenged by the raw, unfiltered story of human compassion and resilience. Margaret's work represented something far more complex than any legal document could capture. As she concluded her explanation, the courtroom felt different. The cold, formal space had been transformed into a place of potential understanding. Margaret had done more than defend herself. She had opened a window into a different way of seeing justice, community, and human potential. The revelation was complete. What had begun as a potential legal punishment was becoming a moment of profound human connection and understanding. Thomas's story, and the stories of countless other children, hung in the air, a powerful testament to the difference one person's commitment could make. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, suspended between what was and what could be. Judge Edward Hartley's fingers trembled slightly as he reviewed the documents again, his decades of judicial experience suddenly feeling inadequate against Margaret's powerful testimony. Something extraordinary was happening. The legal papers, that moments ago appeared to be violations, now looked like maps of hope. each document revealing incredible stories of children rescued, families supported, and communities transformed. Hartley's mind drifted to his own childhood. He remembered growing up in a strict household where rules were absolute, where compassion was often seen as weakness. His father, a retired military officer, had taught him that the law was black and white, with no room for gray areas. But Margaret's stories challenged everything he had believed. Her work wasn't about breaking rules. It was about bending rigid systems to protect the most vulnerable. Each creative solution she had implemented represented a lifeline for children who would have otherwise been lost. A single tear formed in the corner of the judge's eye. It was barely noticeable, a tiny droplet that represented years of unexpressed emotion, of rigid thinking finally cracking open to reveal human understanding. The courtroom fell silent. Even the court clerks and legal assistants seemed transfixed by the profound moment unfolding before them. Margaret stood tall, her dignity radiating through the space, her entire being a testament to the power of compassionate action. Hartley's mind raced through memories of children he had seen in his courtroom over the years. How many had been failed by the very system he represented? How many lives could have been different with someone like Margaret fighting for them? The legal documents began to blur. What once seemed like clear violations now appeared as complex narratives of survival, hope, and human resilience. Margaret hadn't just broken rules. She had reimagined what support could look like. Her work with Thomas continued to echo in the courtroom. A young boy who could have become another statistic, another child lost in a broken system, had instead found hope. Margaret's intervention had not just changed one life, but had potentially transformed generations. The judge's hands, usually steady and controlled, now shook slightly. Years of institutional thinking were collapsing, replaced by a profound understanding of true justice. Justice wasn't about punishment. It was about creating opportunities for healing and growth. Margaret represented something far more powerful than any legal argument. She was living proof that compassion could be a revolutionary act, that breaking rules could sometimes mean creating a more humane system. Hartley's professional facade began to crumble. The stern judge who had entered the courtroom that morning was disappearing, replaced by a human being capable of genuine empathy and understanding. The other legal professionals watched in stunned silence. This was more than a legal proceeding. It was a moment of profound human transformation. Margaret had done something remarkable. She had humanized a system that often felt cold and impersonal. Her community center wasn't just a building. It was a beacon of hope, a place where children could dream, where potential wasn't limited by circumstances, where support meant more than just following rules. As the moments passed, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The rigid legal space was transforming into something more organic, more alive. Margaret's stories had opened a window into a different way of seeing justice, community, and human potential. Hartley realized that his entire understanding of his role was changing. He wasn't just a judge interpreting laws. He was a guardian of human potential, responsible for creating spaces where people could heal, grow, and transform. The turning point was subtle but profound. It wasn't about a dramatic courtroom speech or a sudden revelation. It was about human connection, about seeing beyond paperwork to the lives behind the documents. Margaret stood quietly, her strength radiating through the courtroom. She wasn't asking for sympathy or special treatment. She was simply presenting the truth, that compassion was the most powerful form of justice. In that moment, everything changed. The lines between right and wrong, between legal and compassionate, began to blur, and at the center of it all was Margaret, a beacon of hope, a warrior for children, a true guardian of human potential. The courtroom breathed with a new energy as Judge Hartley cleared his throat. His hands, which had moments ago been preparing a harsh judgment, now moved with a different intention. The papers before him told a story far more complex than any legal violation. "Ms. Williams," he began, his voice softer than before. "This Court recognizes the extraordinary work you have been doing for our community. Margaret stood perfectly still, her heart racing but her exterior calm. Years of fighting for children had taught her to remain composed, even in the most challenging moments. Hartley continued, "Instead of a fine, the court will provide additional resources to support your community center." The words hung in the air, almost unbelievable. The very system that had seemed ready to punish her was now offering support. The other legal representatives looked shocked. This was unprecedented. A judge completely reversing his initial judgment based on human stories rather than strict legal interpretations. Margaret's mind flew back to her grandmother's kitchen in Liverpool. Elizabeth would have smiled, knowing that compassion could indeed change systems. The lessons of community, of standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, had always been her guiding light. The court clerk began preparing documents that would provide funding and official support for Margaret's community center. What had started as a potential legal battle was transforming into a moment of institutional redemption. "Your work with children like Thomas," Hartley explained, "demonstrates a level of community service that goes beyond traditional legal frameworks." His words acknowledged something profound, that true justice was about healing, not just punishment. Tears formed in Margaret's eyes, but she did not let them fall. These were tears of validation, of recognition that her years of hard work had finally been seen. The community center that had been her life's mission was now officially supported by the very system that had once seemed to work against her. The courtroom felt different. The cold, formal space had become a place of hope, of possibility. Margaret's journey represented something larger than herself. It was a testament to the power of persistent compassion. Hartley spoke about creating a new model of community support, using Margaret's work as an example. He talked about how legal systems needed to be more flexible, more human. Each word was a step towards meaningful change. Other community leaders who had been quietly watching began to applaud. Margaret's victory was not just personal. It was a triumph for every child who had been overlooked, for every community member who had been underestimated. The judge continued to explain how Margaret's approach could be a model for other community intervention programs. Her creative solutions, her deep understanding of children's needs would now become a blueprint for future social support systems. Margaret thought about Thomas, about Emily, about Michael, all the children whose lives had been transformed. This moment was for them, a validation that someone was willing to fight for their potential. The legal documents that had once threatened to destroy her work were now becoming instruments of support. Each page represented a new opportunity, a fresh chance for children to dream, to grow, to become more than their circumstances. Hartley's final words were simple but powerful. "The law must serve humanity," he said, "not the other way around." It was a radical statement from a judge who had once been known for his strict interpretations. As Margaret left the courtroom, the sunlight seemed brighter. The Manchester street outside felt different, full of possibility, of hope. Her journey had shown that one person's commitment could indeed change systems. The community center would now receive official support. More children would have opportunities. More families would find hope. Margaret's fight was about more than her personal victory. It was about creating a more compassionate world. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "When no one else stands up for children, we must." Today, the entire legal system had stood up with her. Redemption had come not through punishment, but through understanding. Hope had triumphed over rigid thinking. And at the center of it all was Margaret, a beacon of compassion, a guardian of children's potential, a true hero of her community. The story was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning.